In fact, this is such a big problem, it's hard to know where to start. It's a bit like trying to figure out how to clear up after a natural disaster. But I think I'll start by saying that he don't even know how to walk. I don't mean that literally, of course, I mean he can't walk like James Bond. And I call this problem the Lazenby strut.
Excuse me, sir. Commander Bond to see you.
Right, Chairman.
Aye, aye, sir. If you please, sir. Thank you.
Now, I don't want to come across as a racialist, but I reckon some of this has something to do with the fact that George Lazenby is Australian. This point is in fact made in one of the documentaries about the film, and the filmmakers actually wanted him to tone this down a bit. But it don't seem like it actually worked, because it's still in the film.
My walk was such that Peter would pull me up. He said, "Stop that Australian swagger."
Although on one occasion he does walk around like he's got a sore knob. But then again, I suppose that's not all that surprising given the amount of sex he has in this film. But let's just remind ourselves how Sean Connery done it.
Good evening, sir.
Happens to be 3 a.m. When do you sleep, 007?
Never on the firm's time, sir.
Now I call this a complex walk. It's defined by its contradictions. It's graceful but masculine. It's confident yet cautious. And it also somehow reveals a deference to authority and a sense of a man who is bound by a sense of duty to Queen and country. I think you can also see from this that by comparing the two actors we get an insight into what's wrong with Lazenby's performance. So I'm going to compare 3 scenes from On Her Madge to Goldfinger, and these are all going to be similar sorts of scenes. So the first example is when things get a bit tense between Bond and M.
You've had 2 years to run him down.
Does this mean you've lost confidence in me?
I'm well aware of your challenge, 007. The license to kill is useless unless one can set up the target. I'll find you a more suitable assignment, that's all.
So under the circumstances...
That's all.
And then compare that to Goldfinger.
You've hardly distinguished yourself, have you? You were supposed to observe Mr. Goldfinger, not borrow his girlfriend. Instead of that, Goldfinger goes off to Europe, and it's only by the grace of God, your friend Leiter, and my intervention with the British Embassy in Washington, that you're not in the custody of the Miami Beach police.
Sir, I'm aware of my shortcomings, but I'm prepared to continue this assignment in the spirit you suggest, if I knew what it was about.
The second example is the delivery of one-liners. So take this example from On Her Madge.
He had lots of guts!
And this example from Goldfinger.
Shocking.
The third and final example has to do with Bond as a cultured and sophisticated man who has a deep understanding of food and drink. So take this example from On Her Madge.
Royal Beluga, north of the Caspian.
And then compare this to a similar scene in Goldfinger.
I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended, sir. With an overdose of bon bois.
Superficially, of course, Lazenby looks the part. He is, after all, a very handsome man, and he also, to his credit, does a very convincing English accent, despite the fact that he's Australian. But in the final analysis, Lazenby is so second-rate compared to Sean Connery. Connery is in a completely different league. And you can't help compare the two of them.
George, obviously there's going to be some comparison between yourself and Sean Connery. How do you think this comparison will affect your image?
I wasn't compared with Sean Connery before. And now it can only lead to better things, I hope.
In fact, journalists were still going on about this in the 1970s.
Did they hold Sean Connery above your head all the time?
A lot of the time. It was mentioned when he said, remember, you know, it's different scenes. He said, well, when you're there in front of this window, remember how in such and such a scene where Sean flicked his eyes up like that and he did this and that, which is all dramatic stuff, which Sean does as an actor, which he knows what he's doing when he does it, and it works for him. But it doesn't necessarily say it'll work for me.
There's also this separate problem that I don't really know how to name. So I'll just call it the problem.
Royal Beluga, north of the Caspian.
So why is Lazenby such a terrible actor? Well, it's pretty obvious actually. He was just a male model who advertised ice cream.
Now is the time for ice cream. Ice cream time! It's ice cream time with Lion's Mane. Ice cream time with Lion's Mane.
Alright, I'm only joking. He also advertised chocolate.
Here comes Big Fry with exotic Big Fry Turkish Delights, full of Big Fry Eastern promise. Big Fry Turkish Delights.
'Cause big fries are coming by. Big Fry.
Now, before you got this role, you were doing commercials for a chocolate manufacturer. How difficult was the transition?
What worries you most about taking on a multi-million-dollar movie like this?
Being able to do it well. That's what I'm hoping to be able to do. I just hope that my inexperience won't show.
But to be fair to Lazenby, I don't think all of these problems can be laid at his feet. Because there are problems with the characterisation of James Bond in this film that are not necessarily related to Lazenby's performance.
I was very uptight lots of the times because I didn't understand exactly what was going on. And the only person you could ask, the only person who knew what was going on was the director. And the director was very busy with his technical things, and he had control of 2 units and a whole lot of things, and he didn't really feel that an actor was important in the role. He felt that you could get any guy, I think he mentioned on BBC radio, that you could get any guy, put him in that part and make him James Bond.
Because the other thing you gotta know is that this is also a new director, Peter Hunt. Now this bloke worked on the previous films as an editor and a second unit director, but after complaining to the producers, he was promoted to the role of director.
I said, I've finished with editing, I don't want to do any more editing, I'm going to direct.
So there are obviously going to be some things that George Lazenby's told to do by the director that he couldn't have helped. For example, in the opening scene you got Bond talking directly to the camera, which seems pretty goofy.
This never happened to the other fella.
But then later on he also talks to a portrait of the Queen, and that seems ridiculous too.
Sorry, ma'am.
But worst of all, he talks to himself in the mirror after he gets his leg over.
Hello, you old devil.
When Bond is taken to Blofeld's hideout by helicopter, he also pretends to be airsick, and he pulls this pathetic expression, and in my opinion this does further damage to Bond's image. Now you can excuse this because Bond is actually in disguise in this moment, but then there's a scene later on in the film where Bond is no longer in disguise, And he has this expression of panic. Now to me this seems very out of character, because Bond is meant to be cool-headed at all times. This is how Sean Connery played the character, and this is well established in the minds of the audience. And I say this was another fault of the director, not really understanding the character of James Bond. There's also a scene in the film where Bond looks at a playboy. I suppose this fits because in some ways they're pushing the playboy's side to Bond himself, but they're doing this a bit too much, I'd say. The thing is, you can only go so far in this direction without Bond coming across as a complete tosser. And with Sean Connery's portrayal of Bond, there was always a saving grace of him taking his commitment to country and mission very seriously. And this underlying seriousness and sense of duty is absent from Lazenby's Bond, and he just comes across as a sort of shallow womaniser. I think the film's problems boil down to the fact that you've got a combination of a director who's out of his depth and a lead actor who's immature and inexperienced.
I look back at some of the interviews I did and some of the things I said, and I can see how much growing up I needed to do before I did that role.